The meadow was quiet when they stepped into it. No gunfire, no shouting, just bird song in the trees and the rustling of boots in the morning grass. The French soldiers moved in rows, neat, practiced, efficient. Their bayonets glinted in the sunlight. The flag-bearers kept perfect pace, and the officers, riding just ahead, scanned the terrain for signs of the enemy they'd been told was retreating. It felt like they were marching through a painting. Hills rolled gently in the distance. Farmhouses sat peacefully in the shade of clustered trees. The sky was clear and soft with early August light. A few men laughed. Others sang. The pace was brisk, but there was no urgency, no fear. Then came the sound. Not a crack. Not a burst. Something deeper. A churning, grinding roar that seemed to rise from the ground itself. And then the first shells landed. The meadow disappeared in fire. It was August 22nd, 1914, the bloodiest day in French military history. More than 27,000 men were killed in the span of a few hours. Entire regiments were wiped out before they ever saw the enemy. It was the first full day of fighting on the Western Front, and no one, on either side, understood yet what kind of war this would become. The French believed in the charge, in bravery, in elan. They dressed their soldiers in bright red trousers and blue coats, trained them to attack in columns, to advance with fixed bayonets and patriotic songs. The Germans had brought machine guns. The battlefields that day stretched across the Ardennes forest and the rolling farmland of southern Belgium. Villages with names like Rossignol, Virton, and Neufchâteau became killing fields before breakfast. The French, executing Plan 17, had been ordered to take the offensive. Push into enemy territory, regain lost ground, strike fast, strike hard. But the Germans weren't retreating. They were waiting. In Rossignol, the 3rd Colonial Infantry Division advanced into wooded ridges under the assumption that German forces had fallen back. They encountered only stillness at first. No shots, no resistance. Just the sound of their own movement echoing too loudly in the trees. Then, as the sun rose, the forest came alive with fire. The Germans had dug in the night before, hiding in trenches, behind tree trunks and earthworks, using camouflage and elevated firing positions. Their artillery had been carefully plotted. Their machine guns were sighted on every trail and open field. When the French stepped into range, they were torn apart. The first volley hit like a shockwave. Men were thrown backward into the underbrush. Horses screamed. Officers fell before they could issue a single order. Within minutes, the marching columns were in disarray. Some charging blindly forward, others freezing in place as bullets snapped past their heads. Colonel Rossignol, commanding the 3rd Colonial Division, tried to regroup his men in a nearby clearing. He was shot off his horse by a sniper before he reached the center of the field. Around him, men lay twisted in unnatural angles, some calling for medics, others too far gone to speak. They'd been trained to fight men. Instead, they met machines. In the small town of Virton, the French 33rd Infantry Regiment attempted to cross a narrow stone bridge. The structure was exposed, flanked by tree-covered slopes on either side. As the first platoon stepped onto it, they were hit with concentrated rifle fire from the left bank. Dozens dropped at once. The survivors tried to sprint across, slipping in the blood and bodies of their comrades. One lieutenant ordered his men to crawl under the bridge, using the riverbank for cover. When they reached the far side, they found only more fire, 2 machine gun nests hidden in a stone wall, raking the crossing with relentless bursts. Those who made it across were cut down before they could take 5 steps. By noon, the bridge was impassable. It was covered in so many corpses that the structure itself couldn't be seen beneath the pile of red and blue uniforms. Elsewhere, the 10th Corps attempted to push through the woods near Neufchâteau. The terrain was thick, tangled, disorienting. Officers with maps quickly found that none of the paths matched the lines drawn in headquarters. Communications failed. Units became separated. Orders were shouted, but lost in the roar of gunfire. In one sector, a group of French soldiers found themselves cut off and surrounded by three sides. They dug shallow holes in the dirt, using mess kits and helmets as shovels. A young private, just 19, fired 26 rounds, and then watched his best friend die beside him when a shell exploded 2 meters away. His ears rang for hours. He didn't hear his own screaming. By dusk, most of that group was dead or missing. Their names would not be recorded for days. At Rossignol, a field hospital was established in the rear, using a collapsed farmhouse as cover. Wounded poured in faster than the medics could treat them. Gut wounds, shattered jaws, missing limbs. Some men were screaming, others had gone silent, staring into nothing. The smell was overwhelming. Gunpowder, feces, blood, mud, and rot. One nurse, no older than 20, wept as she wrapped a tourniquet on a man whose leg had been nearly severed. He bled out anyway. She moved on to the next without pausing. By nightfall, the roof of the farmhouse collapsed from artillery fire. Half the patients died under the rubble. The survivors were dragged to a ditch outside, shivering in blood-stained blankets, clutching each other in the dark. The official reports, written days later, would call the day a tactical error. They used words like miscalculation, encounter engagement, premature advance. They didn't describe the man who clawed at his own throat for an hour after a shell drove splinters into his lungs. They didn't mention the child's toy found in a burning house in Verton, or the dog that lay whimpering beside its dead master, licking his face until both were killed in the next barrage. What happened that day wasn't a skirmish. It was the death of a generation. Back in France, the newspapers printed glowing headlines, stories of honor, sacrifice, bravery. The government needed optimism. The people needed to believe in victory. But the soldiers who returned from that first day didn't speak in patriotic terms. They spoke of mud, of fire, of friends who screamed their names before going silent forever. They spoke of the sound the Maxim gun made when it tore through a dozen men in 3 seconds, and of how the bodies twitched afterward. The French army would retreat in the days that followed, forced to reconfigure its entire strategy. Plan 17 had collapsed. The concept of the offensive à outrance, of spirit defeating steel, had been shredded by modern warfare. They dug trenches. So did the Germans. The ground between them would become the Western Front. And that first day was the warning the world ignored. In the years that followed, more battles would be fought. Verdun, the Somme, Ypres, names that would define the horror of the First World War. But August 22, 1914, remained unmatched in sheer loss of life in a single day. It was when the illusion broke. When flags and glory were replaced by wire and fear, when men stopped marching and started crawling, and when the dead began to outnumber the living. Today the fields around Rossignol are green again. Trees sway in the breeze. Cows graze near the ruins of farmhouses rebuilt over the past century. But if you look close, you'll see the scars. Metal fragments buried just beneath the soil. Names etched into old stone crosses, a line of trees that still grows crooked, warped by the heat of a shell that exploded more than 100 years ago. The birds still sing, but if you stand there long enough, you might hear something else. Something quieter, the echo of boots on grass, the rattle of metal, the silence that follows after the last breath leaves the body. Thank you for listening to Last Post History. Subscribe for more true stories from the world at war.